Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah ma ba'd. Very important question, frequently asked question. This question is asked all the time. And to be honest, to discuss this in the detail that it deserves, we could be here for a very long time. I don't think it's going to get resolved in a few minutes. But I'll try my best to try and condense it, summarize it as much as we can. Are women allowed to recite the Quran when they're on their menses? Now, here we're talking about reciting, the moving of the tongue and the lips. Here we're talking about touching the mushaf. We are not talking about her thinking about the Quran or reciting the Quran in her heart, in her memory, inside, without any kind of verbalization or moving of the tongue and the lips. Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah in Sharh Sahih Muslim has said, if she's thinking about the Quran, say for example she memorized something from the Quran and she wants to revise it in her head, so she's thinking, she's thinking about it, she's not reciting it, there is no difference of opinion between the ulama that this is permissible. Here the question is reciting the Quran whilst moving her tongue and her lips, touching the Quran, is this permissible or not, while she's on her menses or on her nifas? Now the majority of the ulama have said that it is not permissible. He says sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, لا يمس القرآن إلا طاهر. The person who is in janabah, a person who has no wudu, is not allowed to touch the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Waqi', لا يمسه إلا المطهرون. Nobody can touch it except for those people in tahara. And we also have another hadith, and again, there's different responses from both sides when it comes to, so now they have said no, the ayah does not refer to the Quran, it refers to the Lawh al-Mahfuz and it refers to the angels. You can't use that when it comes to the Quran. As for the hadith of Tahir, yeah, the person has to have wudu, but what about a woman who's on her menses or a woman on her nifas for 30-40 days? You're going to stop her from reciting the Quran? So there's toing and froing, and like I said, if we were to go into the details, it could be very lengthy, and I think a lot of people just want it condensed anyway. This hadith, on the authority of Ibn Umar, is in Muslim Ahmad. This is probably the most critical hadith when it comes to both sides. It's been reported that he said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, لا تقرأ الحائض ولا جنب شيء من القرآن. The woman on her menses or the person in his sexual impurity or her in sexual impurity, they should not recite anything from the Quran. So anyone in sexual impurity and a woman in her menses, a haid, she should not recite the Quran. Now, the majority of the ulama have rejected this hadith because of a person called Ismail ibn Ayyash in the chain of narration. The majority of Ahl al-Hadith. Some of the ulama from Ahl al-Hadith have accepted this narration because of the fact that there are supporting narrations which strengthen this wording. Ibn Kathir, Diyad-Din Maqdisi, Al-Murdawi, and others from the ulama, they have accepted and they have said, no, okay, that particular chain of narration is not correct, but there are other chains which would support it. So this is the view of the majority. They've taken ayahs from the Quran, they have taken a general meaning from the ahadith from the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, that if a person wants to recite the Quran by touching the mushaf, then they need to have wudu, and if they want to recite the Quran out of memory, they need to be in a state of away from major impurity. They don't have to have minor impurity, meaning they don't have to have wudu, but they have to at least not be in a state of major impurity. And there are so many rulings that they have said that they made qiyas with as well, to say that a woman on her hayd and a woman in her nifas is similar to a person in janabah. They can't enter the masjid, they can't fast, they can't pray, etc. I mean, fasting is a little bit different, but they can't pray, etc. So this is the view of the majority. There is a view from the Maliki madhab. This is also the view of Imam Bukhari. It's also the view of Ibn Jarir al-Tabari, the famous Mufassir. And it's also the view of Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, and it's the view of Ibn Uthaymeen, and it's the view of Ibn Taymiyyah, and it's the view of Ibn Qayyim, and it's the view of a lot of the contemporaries, where they have said, give us one evidence to say a woman cannot recite anything from the Quran. In actual fact, Aisha radiallahu anha, she said, كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يذكر الله في كل أحيان. The Messenger of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم used to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in all situations. The majority of respondents said yes, in all situations, but there's a wording which says, except that if he was in janabah. As you can see here, there's a lot of toing and froing. So they have said, the Malikiyya and the ulama that have followed them, they have said, listen, there is no dalil whatsoever. And there are indirect evidences as well. So for example, when Aisha went on Hajj, she was on her menses. So the Messenger of Allah ﷺ says to her, "If'ali ma yaf'al Hajj." Do what the person who is doing his pilgrimage doing. What do they do on Hajj? Except recite the Quran and make dhikr of Allah and dua and dhikr. Except don't make tawaf around the house. This is what he said to her, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Therefore, the Maliki have said, look, here is an additional proof to say that if a woman is going for Hajj, then she's going to recite Quran. And he told her to do what everybody else is doing. We also in Sahih Bukhari, now Imam Bukhari, like I said, he's a supporter of this. Imam Bukhari brings narrations from some of the Salaf. So Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anh, he used to have a slave, a servant, should we say, and he used to tell her to recite the Quran, and through the Mus'haf, this is even now through the Mus'haf, whilst touching the Mus'haf, while turning the pages with some kind of a stick or a strap. So Imam Bukhari has supported this view and said, listen, women can recite the Quran. They can even look at the Mus'haf and recite the Quran as long as they do not touch the Quran. And this is the way that we can reconcile all the evidences. So if we were to take your evidences, لا يمس القرآن إلا طاهر, nobody should touch the Mus'haf except that if he is in a state of tahara, we will take that. Okay, but does that mean that they can't recite? Does it mean that they can't recite? For me now, just to conclude all of this, for me, I think the strongest view is one of the views that has been mentioned by Ibn Uthaymeen rahimahullah. Ibn Uthaymeen, he said, listen, the majority of the ulama have got a very strong point here. You can't just discard what they have said and say, listen, there's no evidences and we're just going to completely reject it because there's no evidences. You can't just do that. This is not how scholarly ijtihad deductions work. Right? You have to take into consideration what the ulama have said. So you can't just say, okay, well, the majority have said that, but there's no evidence. You can't just do that. And then at the same time, really, if you look at the view of the Malikiyya, Ibn Taymiyyah, that's a very strong view. So Ibn Taymiyyah has come with a balance, which for me, I think is the correct opinion. He says, if a woman wants to recite the Quran for the purpose of reciting the Quran, then this is not allowed. Friday, Surah Kahf, not allowed. Surah Mulk before you go to sleep, because you want to recite the Quran, not allowed. However, if the woman fears by not reciting the Quran, she's going to lose what she has memorized. If the woman wants to attend a tafsir class and she wants to recite what is there, for example, then there is no harm. By the way, the majority are all agreed that she can read tafsir. Because remember, we said internally, she's not verbalizing, she's just using her eyes to read. And she's holding the book of tafsir, and that's not taking the ruling on the Mus'haf, so there's no harm in that, especially if it's been translated. There's no harm in that whatsoever. So what he is saying here, Ibn Uthaymeen rahimahullah, he's saying that if there is a need for her to touch the Quran, if there is obviously with a barrier, if there is a need for her to recite the Quran because she fears that her iman is dipping or she's forgetting things or things like that, then there is no harm in that. We also need to highlight, and we've talked about this previously, and again, I'm very sorry for the length of this, that there is a difference between reciting and ruqyah. There is a difference between reciting and dhikr. There is a difference between reciting and dua. So a woman on her menses, can she say, رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً وَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ, even though this is in Surah Al-Baqarah? The answer is yes, because her intention here is not recitation. If she's giving a lecture, for example, and she wants to quote evidence, is this recitation? No, this is not recitation, this is quoting evidence. If she wants to do ruqyah on herself before she goes to sleep, on her children, for example, all of this is permissible. Why? Because this is not recitation. What we are talking about is where she gets the Mus'haf, whether it's the Mus'haf or her phone or whatever it might be, and says, no, I just want to recite the words of Allah. Is that allowed? For the sake of it? No, it's not allowed. To seek His virtues? No, it's not allowed. But if she feels that there is a need, such as her iman going low, or she needs to revise, or something like that, then it is permissible. And for me, I think that seems to be the stronger view. And like I said, many of the contemporaries have said, on her menses, she can recite. And we're not trying to ignore that view either. But for me, I think this is a good balance. If a person was to follow that view of the Malikiyya and Ibn Taymiyyah, to say that there is nothing which restricts a woman from reciting the Quran through memory or even through the Mus'haf or her phone and her app, as long as she's not touching the Mus'haf itself. This is ijtihad, but this is now, I've just put it out there so that people can understand that there is a difference of opinion. Every single one of us, and this is how fiqh works, and we've talked about this several times, every single one of us will be questioned Yawm al-Qiyamah as to the evidence which you felt was stronger and why you followed it, why you didn't follow it. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He grants us all the best of tawfiq and success. هذا والله أعلم وصلى الله على نبينا محمد.